They call Palestinians terrorists. That's the headline, the slogan, the soundbite repeated enough times to become background noise. It's slipped into news reports, political speeches, and casual conversations like it's a fact, not a label. And when something is said often enough, people stop questioning it. They stop asking where it came from, who benefits from it, and whether it's even true. That's how narratives are built, not with honesty, but with repetition. But I've learned something powerful. Just because something is loud doesn't mean it's right. And just because it's everywhere doesn't make it truth. Questioning the narrative is the beginning of waking up. It's uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. It means admitting you might have been wrong. It means facing the fact that your opinions may have been shaped not by experience or truth, but by someone else's agenda. When I first started paying attention to what was being said about Palestine, I realized how one-sided it was. Every clip, every article, every headline, it was always about violence, danger, chaos. Never about context, never about cause, never about people. Just labels. Labels that stick like glue and make it easy to ignore the rest. But something inside me pushed back. I asked myself, why? Why is one side always the victim and the other always the villain? Why don't we hear about the families, the children, the daily struggle to live with dignity under occupation? Why is resistance always framed as aggression, but military force is called defense? Why are stones criminalized but missiles justified? Those questions don't get answered in a news cycle. You don't find them on primetime TV. You find them when you start looking for yourself. That's what I did. I stopped swallowing the story and started searching. I listened to people who weren't being given a microphone. I looked beyond the headlines and into the lives being affected. I saw footage that didn't make the evening news. I read voices that had been silenced. And what I found wasn't terrorism, it was tragedy. It was struggle. It was a people who had been demonized not because they were dangerous, but because they were defiant, because they refused to be erased. The narrative didn't just lie by what it said, it lied by what it left out. It left out the checkpoints, the demolitions, the children arrested in the middle of the night. It left out the stolen land, the broken homes, the funerals of the innocent. It left out the laughter still rising from behind concrete walls, the prayers whispered in broken streets, the resilience, the love, the hope. All of that was invisible because it didn't fit the script. And when you see that really see it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to nodding along with comfortable lies. You start to recognize the power of narrative, the way it shapes perception, the way it justifies injustice. And you realize the first step toward truth isn't answers, it's questions. So I questioned the narrative, and the truth I found didn't just change how I see Palestinians, it changed how I see everything. They called them terrorists. That's the word that echoed through the media, the government statements, the conversations of people who had never once stepped foot in Palestine. That word was supposed to tell me everything I needed to know. Case closed. Mind made up. But then I saw something that broke the frame entirely. I saw people, not labels, not threats, just people. I saw faces. I saw pain. I saw love. And suddenly that word, that label they had been repeating like a mantra, it didn't make sense anymore. It's easy to believe a story when you've never met the characters, when you've only heard one side and never been curious about the other. But when you actually witness the humanity behind the labels, everything changes. I didn't go searching for some political truth. I wasn't on a mission. I just opened my eyes. And what I saw wasn't anger, it was anguish. It wasn't hate, it was heartbreak. And none of that was on the screen back home. There was a moment I'll never forget. I saw a little girl, no older than 7, walking hand in hand with her brother through the rubble of what used to be their home. No tears, no screams, just quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes when a child has seen too much. And I thought, how do you call the child a terrorist? How do you look at her and not see yourself, your daughter, your niece, someone you protect with everything you have? That's when it hit me. The problem isn't with their humanity. The problem is with our ability to recognize it. Because once you're labeled, you're reduced. You're no longer a person. You become an idea, a threat, a statistic. And people don't feel empathy for ideas, they feel fear. But when I stood in those streets, when I heard those stories, When I saw how people lived and loved in the middle of so much loss, I realized how powerful and dangerous a label can be. It can erase a soul. It can strip away the details that make someone real. And once they're not real to you, it's easy to ignore their suffering. But they are real, so real. I saw a man give away the last bottle of water he had to a stranger. I saw children share a piece of bread like it was a feast. I saw old women laugh like the war couldn't touch their spirit. I saw dignity in poverty. I saw strength in silence. I saw people who've been made invisible to the world, yet still shine with the kind of light that can only come from within. They were not terrorists. They were not monsters. They were not threats. They were teachers. Mothers, sons, dreamers, survivors. They were people who bleed like we bleed, who hope like we hope, who cry, who dance, who pray, who play. And none of that was part of the story I had been told. So when I witnessed it all, something inside me shifted. I didn't just see them, I felt them. And that connection, that raw, unfiltered human connection, was more powerful than any broadcast, any speech, any headline. It cut through the noise and settled deep in my soul. Seeing their humanity shattered the lies. And once I saw them clearly, I could never believe the label again. Hello, you've reached Play AI support. I see you're interested in our cutting-edge voice synthesis technology. Let's explore how we can elevate your project to the next level. Strength doesn't always look like muscle and metals. Sometimes it looks like a man waking up every morning before sunrise, not knowing if the power will work, if water will run, or if the street outside his door is safe but still getting dressed, still showing up, still living. Dignity isn't always in speeches and flags. Sometimes it's in a mother folding her daughter's school uniform with care, even though the school building stands half destroyed and the classroom has no roof. That's the kind of strength and dignity I saw in Palestine, the kind that doesn't make headlines but defines lives. Everywhere I turned, I saw people carrying more than most of us could imagine and doing it with a quiet resilience that shook me to my core. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady, unshakable. A boy sweeping the floor of a shop that barely had a wall still standing. A grandmother smiling as she served tea in a home where windows were replaced by blankets. A taxi driver who cracked jokes while maneuvering around tanks and checkpoints. This wasn't weakness. This was strength disguised as ordinary life. You begin to understand something deep when you see people hold their heads high even when the world pushes them down. They're not asking for pity. They're not performing pain. They're surviving, yes, but more than that, they're living. They're finding joy where others see only dust. They're holding onto culture, family, and faith like lifelines, refusing to be broken. There's something divine in that kind of resilience, something unteachable. And dignity, it's a kind of armor out there. You can see it in the way fathers walk their children through checkpoints with shoulders squared and heads up, like they're leading them into a palace, not a cage. You see it in women refusing to abandon their traditions, their languages, their ways of being, holding on to their identity even when everything around them screams to forget. You feel it in the conversations, the smiles, the unspoken pride in being Palestinian, despite the pain that identity invites. That's not just surviving, that's resisting with grace. It made me reflect on my own life, on what I call struggle, on how often I complain when my comfort is disturbed. And then I look at these people who have adapted to the unimaginable with poise, who've normalized the abnormal, and still somehow managed to treat strangers with kindness, generosity, and warmth. That's not just resilience, it's a lesson, a reminder, a mirror. Strength isn't just standing tall, it's rising after being knocked down 100 times. Dignity isn't about having everything, it's about how you carry yourself when you have nothing left but your name. And in Palestine, I saw that kind of strength and dignity on every street, in every face, behind every set of tired but determined eyes. It's easy to think of war zones as places full of chaos, fear, and hatred. But what I saw was something else. I saw weddings in the middle of wreckage, laughter on balconies beneath drones, children kicking soccer balls in alleyways guarded by soldiers. That isn't just surviving, that's living with purpose, with pride, with spirit. That's the kind of strength that doesn't fade. That's the kind of dignity that no wall can cage. And once you've seen it, you realize they were never defeated. They were always extraordinary. I didn't find Islam in a book or in a lecture or from someone trying to convince me. I found it in the eyes of people who had every reason to give up but chose to keep believing. I found it in the rhythm of their days, the simplicity of their habits, the unshakable peace that seemed to live inside them despite everything going on outside. It wasn't taught to me, it was lived in front of me. And slowly, quietly, it began to move something in me I didn't even know needed moving. I watched a man roll out a thin prayer mat in the corner of a broken building. The walls were cracked, the roof was gone, but still he stood, bowed, and placed his forehead to the floor. There was no hesitation, no fear, just a moment of complete surrender to something greater. And I remember thinking, how do you find the strength to pray in the middle of ruin? What kind of faith carries a person through that? It wasn't about religion in the way I had known it before. It wasn't about rules or rituals. It was about connection, about trust. That moment stuck with me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was the opposite. It was calm, certain, real. And then I started noticing it everywhere. The way people said Alhamdulillah after telling you about their hardships, like gratitude was second nature. The way they paused everything when the call to prayer echoed through the streets, even if bombs had just fallen the night before. The way their faith wasn't just something they practiced, it was something they were. I didn't understand all the words, I didn't know all the verses, but I understood the feeling. There was a purity in it. A kind of surrender that didn't feel weak, it felt powerful. It wasn't about escaping reality. It was about facing it with a sense of peace I had never seen before. That peace didn't come from comfort. It came from conviction. And that kind of conviction, when it lies in someone's heart, it's unshakable. I started asking questions, quiet ones at first. I wasn't looking for conversion. I was just trying to understand how people could still smile, still hope, still love while living in conditions that would break most of us. And every answer led back to faith, not as a crutch, but as a compass, a way of walking through fire and still seeing light. That's when I realized Islam wasn't a foreign thing. It wasn't some distant idea. It was human. It was close. It was in the way people greeted each other with peace, in the way they broke bread with strangers, in the way they bore pain with patience and joy with humility. It was in the way they believed that even in the darkest moments, God was near. And not just near listening. I didn't need a sermon to feel it. I didn't need a translation. I just needed to witness it being lived with honesty and grace. Because when faith is real, you don't have to explain it. It explains itself. And somewhere along that journey, without force, without fear, I found myself drawn in. Not by the rules, but by the rhythm. Not by pressure, but by peace. That's how I found Islam, not through words, but through the unbreakable faith of people who live it with their whole hearts, even when the world gives them every reason not to. Hope is a dangerous thing when the world tries to crush it. It's the one thing you can't kill with bombs or bury under rubble. That's what I saw in Palestine, a kind of resistance that didn't carry guns but carried belief. A hope that wasn't loud or flashy, was stubborn, quiet, deep. You could see it in their eyes, in the way they spoke, in how they carried themselves through pain like it was just another part of life. They weren't just surviving, they were hoping on purpose. And that kind of hope is a weapon the world doesn't know how to fight. Everywhere I looked, I saw people who refused to give up. Not because life was easy, but because giving up just wasn't an option. I saw a man rebuilding his shop for the 4th time. I asked him why he keeps doing it. He smiled and said, "Because my son will inherit this street, not their fear." That kind of statement doesn't come from delusion. It comes from faith, from something planted so deep in the soul that no amount of destruction can reach it. They've tried to erase them, silence them, humiliate them, but they show up every day with the same fire in their chest. They teach their children. They plant olive trees. They paint murals on broken walls. They sing songs that carry their grandparents' voices. That's hope. That's patience. That's resistance. When you live under occupation, even a smile can be an act of defiance. Even walking to school becomes a form of protest. But what amazed me the most wasn't the defiance itself, it was the grace in it. These people aren't just resisting with anger. They're resisting with dignity, with compassion, with a belief that they're on the side of justice and that truth, even if silenced, will rise. I met a young girl who told me her dream was to become a doctor. She said it with such certainty, you'd think she already had a clinic waiting. I looked around her home. Part of the ceiling was missing, textbooks stacked on a cracked floor. Her study light was a flashlight hooked to a battery. But her voice didn't shake. That wasn't just ambition, that was belief. In herself, in her people, in a future worth fighting for. Hope like that doesn't come from comfort. It comes from generations who have been taught to never bow to injustice. It comes from mothers who pass down stories of strength, and fathers who teach their sons to stand tall even when the world tells them to kneel. And it comes from faith. Faith that what is right will prevail, even if not today. What I witnessed wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. A patience that wasn't passive. It was active, fierce. They wait, yes, but they wait while building, while creating, while praying, while loving. They don't wait to live, they live through the wait. That's a lesson most of us haven't had to learn. And the world may try to paint them with one brush, call them hopeless, angry, broken. But I saw the truth. I saw hearts full of light. I saw resistance powered not just by the need to be free, but by the unshakable belief that they will be. Because when you choose hope in a place built on fear, that hope becomes your revolution. There's a difference between learning something and knowing it. Learning is from books, from secondhand stories, from the filtered lens of someone else's experience. But knowing that comes from being there, from standing in the middle of something and letting it change you. That's what happened to me. I didn't just change my opinion. I didn't just feel sorry for people I once misunderstood. I was transformed by truth. And once that truth hit me, I couldn't go back to blind again. I had been told who Palestinians were. I had heard the words, the labels. I had seen the headlines. But none of that prepared me for what I actually witnessed. You can't feel humanity through a screen. You can't understand struggle from a news clip. But when you stand face to face with someone who has suffered more than you can imagine, and still offers you tea, still smiles, still asks about your family, you start to understand that truth lies in the moments we're never shown. I saw children laugh while soldiers stood just yards away. I saw families gather around small dinners like they were feasts. I saw people who had lost everything still find something to give. And with every moment like that, something inside me broke and reformed. Not just emotionally, spiritually, because I realized I had been living in a world full of images, but empty of insight. It's one thing to hear about occupation. It's another to be stopped at a checkpoint with a child clutching your hand and asking why the soldier looks angry. It's one thing to hear about homes being demolished. It's another to walk through the ruins and see a girl still picking flowers from the rubble. That kind of truth doesn't just shift your mind, it reshapes your heart. I thought I understood oppression. I thought I knew what injustice looked like, but what I learned in Palestine wasn't just about struggle, it was about the strength it takes to remain human in a world that tries to strip that away. It was about love in the middle of war, faith in the middle of chaos, hope in the middle of heartbreak. And all of that taught me something no classroom ever could. And when I came back to comfort, back to silence, back to distraction, I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I couldn't go back to casual conversations and careless headlines. Every time someone repeated the old labels, every time someone called them terrorists or dismissed their pain, I felt it in my chest. Not because I wanted to argue, but because I knew they were wrong, deeply, devastatingly wrong. That's what truth does. It doesn't ask for permission. It just settles in. And once it's there, you're not the same. You don't see people the same. You don't pray the same. You don't live the same. I started seeing faith not as a theory, but as a reality. I started recognizing dignity in places I never thought to look. And I started understanding that truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary. I didn't go looking to change. But when the truth finds you, you don't get to stay the same. Not if you're honest, not if you're human. And now that I've seen the truth with my own eyes, I'd rather live in discomfort with clarity than stay blind in comfort ever again.